Everywhere we look, movements are shaping culture. Whether it's organizations like the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition securing historic policy wins, athletes coming together to rock the vote, or people all around the country participating in hashtag Be My Neighbor to spread awareness and kindness in the world. These campaigns succeed not only because of passion, but because they are built on smart strategy and powerful storytelling. Well, today we'll explore with Kristen Grimm, founder of Spitfire Strategies, on how campaigns that are asset framed don't just make noise, they win. Kristen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. So before we dive in, what is one main point you want people to unlearn or learn about designing campaigns?
I want people to learn that anyone can do it. That in fact, since the historic civil rights era, when you think about how hard it was to run a campaign, that these days with technology and other things, I want everybody to understand in a democracy, you have a voice. And whether you want to use it as a consumer, whether you want to use it as a voter, you can absolutely decide something's really important to you and run a campaign and win.
Yeah. So, you speak about the difference when civil rights era and how hard it was to galvanize, pull people together, get information out there. In today's time, we have so many modern technologies. What do you think is the best use to kick off or start a campaign?
In all instances, you need to define the win.
Yes.
You can't have a moving target. You really have to commit to something. What's this thing that if we got it, we'd feel really good about? And I think you really have to start there and have that North Star.
And oftentimes, where do people start? What are you seeing that's common, where folks are kind of missing the mark with the campaigns?
Yeah, I think a lot of times they just come in at really vague, I want things to be better. And it's like, okay, well, no one's responsible for that. So it's going to be a really hard campaign because I already can tell I don't have a decision maker I can go and say, oh, that person has to make life better. But if you say, I want more affordable housing in this place, now we are in the ballpark, but we still have to get really specific. Are you asking that I want landlords to do a certain thing? Well, that's one kind of campaign. Is it that I want the government to do something, to put policies in place? That's something different. And so you do have to commit, basically it's kind of like a battlefield, like where are you making your stand? And I think a lot of times people are like, they're straddling a couple of different places, and that'll be hard too.
What are the common questions you need to ask yourself when starting a campaign? Because you said lean in and be more specific. Is it government you want to do something? Is it organization? So what are the questions that can get people rolling to clearly define their win?
Yeah, I think I always like to say, think about what you want to, just like you said about Desmond and his great Florida Rights Restoration Coalition win. He said, I want to make sure that anybody who has done their time gets their right to vote back. And then he realized that the way to do that before was you had to go one by one to get clemency from the governor of Florida. And that's like, oh my gosh. And then he was like, but if I put it in the Constitution, so now he's getting closer, right?
Yeah.
If I put it in the Constitution, and then you're like, wow, getting a constitutional amendment's going to be hard, right? And in Florida, you have to get a supermajority to agree with you. But that's what he set his sights on. And it was a very specific thing. So now well, I'm going to be running a ballot initiative, has to run, in one of the election years. And now and I got to get 61% of the vote, which he did. But if you just sort of more generally thought, oh, I'm going to maybe put pressure on the legislature to do something, he really had to assess, where do I think this change can happen? Because it could have been done legislatively, but he was like, I'm bringing it to the people. I think the people are going to give us our answer here.
And once you define that win, where do you go from there?
Once you define the win, the thing is you have to see your pathways. And usually, and I just went through them with Desmond, there were a couple of different pathways, right? We could have just done a huge campaign with the people who had been incarcerated and helped them go one by one. We could have made a machine that had them go up there. But instead, Desmond was like, looks at the legislature, is not looking very good there. So then he's like, we do have ballot initiatives, and you don't have those in every state. So it was an option for him. So once you know what your option is, then you can say, so now I have a path. And then he made really important decisions about how he was going to do his campaign. And one of the most important was his asset-based framing, right? Where he really talked about, if they're returning citizens, and that language even matters, right? These aren't ex-felons, these are returning citizens, that, they have done their time and they should get to vote, on the policies that impact their lives. And then they reminded everybody that we all have somebody we love who has been impacted, and we don't want them to not have this right. And so it really made it something that many of us actually do know somebody personally. And that's a really important thing when you're campaigning, is to make it personal so that people really are motivated to join you in that campaign effort.
Yeah, that is so true. When you think about that broader question, we all have someone, whether close or far removed, that has been impacted by the justice system.
Exactly.
Right, and that piques your interest.
Yeah. It makes you think like, yeah, I'd like that person. Like now you're suddenly doing it for someone as opposed to, some strangers you don't know. Like really reminding us, these are our neighbors, these are our friends, these are our family.
Yeah. Now, in the era where, a lot of folks especially are bootstrapping and, ground gaming a lot of campaigns, there's not a lot of funding behind some of the good initiatives that we see. How is asset framing a plus for campaigns?
I think asset framing is a plus because it gives you a chance to bring more people to the cause. Like I always, I have a good friend, Ann Mosley, and she talks a lot about different types of capital, and do you have the capital available to you? And of course, we always think of capital very explicitly as financial capital. But in fact, you have intellectual capital. Like, do you have some good ideas? Like, what's a good idea you want to get into place? And you think about all the things that people have put in place that make things better for other people. You also need to have social capital, and that's relationships. Do you have the relationships? And there's kind of people capital. Do you have the people power that's actually going to do something? So I think asset framing does is, as soon as you're starting to other someone or stigmatize somebody, you're actually making it less likely people are going to want to do something for them. So a lot of the times we actually make our jobs harder when we talk about at-risk youth. Like, whoa, those youth sound, but when you talk about striving youth, as Travian will talk about, suddenly you're like, I like striving youth. I want to support striving youth who are trying to unlock opportunity. And so I think when you do asset-based framing, immediately you actually have more people to pull to your cause. Versus when we're starting to other and stigmatize, we're actually reinforcing stereotypes. And even if we get that one win, I think you might find yourself not in a great place moving forward.
And what when you are looking at the field and people have a message they want to get out or a campaign, what are the things you look for that says, okay, we have something here and we can take this and do something with it? Oftentimes people will come to professionals, looking for you to dream up the whole thing. It's like, well, you got to give me something to work with.
You got to give me something to work with. Yeah. I mean, I'm really looking to see if an issue is ripe. First of all, it's really hard to get people's attention. The attention economy is a real thing. So I really have to understand, like, are you really trying to push something that's already on people's minds and hearts? Because if it's not, and you're like, well, first we're going to have to get people to know this exists, then you're like, yeah, you may not be ready for a campaign. You may need to be doing some ground softening before we really run a campaign. And then two, that there actually is a path forward where I don't see a big blockage or just a real point of failure. So like when you think about immigration, I think one of the reasons, I think everybody can agree that the immigration system currently does not work and people would like it to work better. But almost all the solutions they bring forward are these incredibly comprehensive, very bulky, you just can't even understand it. It just sounds like, I don't see how that's going to make that better. And so to me, I'm like, that's going to be really hard to get people to rally around it. And more importantly, it's going to be really easy for the critics to just be picking that thing apart the whole time. And so I don't really like that. I like to have a more streamlined way that we can get really clear about, well, what is this thing really about? The meaning making of it is so compelling that I can really see people being willing to like put down their phones, call their elected, or, go into the community to do something. I want to see that, because that what I see there is momentum. I see
Mm-hmm.
like these are my momentum makers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what are some campaigns? Because Florida Rights, very successful campaign, but at the start of it, almost seemed impossible, right? And everyone's rallying behind,
Definitely,
celebrating the
yeah.
great work of it. But what were some of the challenges you had at the start, as most people struggle with the start of their campaign?
Yeah. Well, I'll actually talk about the end of it, because I
Okay.
came in at the end. So, when I came into contact with FRRC, Desmond team had won the big victory. But I actually started working with them because as soon as they won the victory, and the thing you have to be prepared for is sometimes you win and there's backlash. And so immediately that legislature that
Yep.
they decided
Yep.
to not put, their trust in, turned around and said, so, you've got 1.2 million people put on the voter rolls, and suddenly legislature says they have to pay all their fines and fees. Now, there's a couple things. One, you're backing into a campaign I hate, which is now I have to go explain to people fines and fees, and that's what they had to do. So, but also you have to say, well, a lot of these fines and fees are actually unjust and predatory as well. But you kind of can't get into the whole system, right? You kind of have to be like, oh my gosh, there was so much excitement. We're going into an election. What do we want to do? And Desmond and team were really smart in that they said, we're going to have a fines and fees fund. We just want to make sure people can vote. And so we raised $38 million in a campaign, and they were in buses all over in the 2020 elections. And that's something like you don't expect it. So I tell people sometimes your campaign picks you, because obviously they really wanted to go just doing voter registration that year and not running kind of a secondary campaign. But they had to run a whole secondary campaign to say, yeah, we thought we got this done. But of course, people always are trying to foil people from
Yeah.
voting. But they came back really strong even in part two. So that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I participated in some things. I hosted an online, I forget the gaming platform, Flitch, Touch,
Okay. I don't know. Twitch? No.
Twitch. It may be Twitch.
Okay.
Yes, we did a fundraising campaign
Oh,
on
great.
Twitch with athletes and
Awesome.
all the things for the campaign. But that came through coalition building. How important is it to build coalitions and rely on the strength and resources of partners, that can fill spaces that you may not be able to fill?
Absolutely. I think anytime, once you know what you need to do, you kind of have to do that power assessment that says, do I have the power and reach to get this thing done? And sometimes you can, if you're a pretty good organization with good relationships, sometimes like you might be doing something and you can kind of do it on your own. But a lot of the times we'll come up short. We'll say, oh, like to reach all across the state of Florida, I'm clearly going to need. And a lot of times you have to go to unlikely allies. A lot of the times, and certainly in a case where in Florida, when you have to get 61% of the voters, you're having to appeal to a lot of different kinds of people. And so in that case, you absolutely have to pull together people that are going to bring different constituencies to your cause. And you're having to make the deal, which is you're just agreeing to that. You're just agreeing this is a good idea. You're not necessarily agreeing on everything.
Yeah, because, especially working in the state of Florida, I have a lot of political friends. Some work, lobbying, some work in politicians. And when they tell me the events and parties that they go to, I'm like, I don't know if I don't know if I could swing it, but you have to, right? In order to move the mark, move the campaign, you got to work with people on opposite sides. So how do you anticipate what potential opposition may look like and that may derail the campaign, and how do you work to get around that?
Absolutely. It's really important to know what you're up against. I often joke that mostly what you're up against is apathy. So you hope you have opposition. It would suggest you you have more momentum, because a lot of people, people just aren't, they don't care enough, and they won't move for you. But with opposition, one nice thing is generally you can see them coming. They're telling you they don't like it. They're telling you why they don't like it. Now, sometimes what they're saying publicly about why they don't like it is different than what they're saying behind the scenes, so you do have to understand it. And your job, of course, is to minimize the opposition. with whatever you're trying to get done. And a lot of times that's not just attacking. People don't just want to see two forces clashing. So in a lot of ways, that's where you start to go. And I always say, like, I pull support from them. I make them weaker by kind of taking out from under them. And so back to your point of coalitions, can you be making some side deals where people are starting to say, hey, like, let's not get in the way of this, or I'm not going to be involved in that. And you can start to, take them apart kind of underneath, which I think is a good way to do it versus like, I'm just going to come at them. I think everything's so divisive, and it's easy to think like when my clients will call and they'll say, let's go make people mad about this. I'm like, aren't people mad enough? Like, really? Do we need more mad? But I'm interested because it's like, well, what other emotion might they like to feel that we could actually offer? And I think that's really important when you have oppositional forces. Is I think it's so easy to make it this two-way conversation, and you have to remember that you're having a conversation usually with a lot more people. And so don't get overly focused on this one part, even though you have to keep them in mind and find ways so that they don't, end up derailing your efforts. But I think sometimes we overly focus on it versus kind of our people power building, which is way more important at the end of the day.
And you mentioned clients, and their questions or requests. What is a common either thought or consideration when you're infusing asset framing campaign development, especially for those who may not know what asset framing is all about?
This is probably the hardest thing. So, and I even watch people, they come see me, they come see Trabian, they're like, yes. And then as soon as we get out of the presence, I always joke, it's like then like as soon as they're out of the big light, they like get back in the shadows. And they're so worried about if you don't use the fear and the shame. If you step away from these words of at-risk kids, like, then they won't know the kids we're talking about. And so it's so interesting. And I just think it's any change, right? They're so used to using this language. And even some of the language they use, you suddenly are like, hey, that's actually what you should think about doing differently. And I think they just think, well, but if we go positive and they, whoever they is, are negative, we look Pollyanna and they look tough. And it's like, that's a really weird binary choice that I think is probably completely false. But these are all the things that when you are saying, hey, do it differently than we've been doing it, even though you would say, in a lot of instances, we're not winning as much. We're not doing as much majority making as we'd like to be doing. So why wouldn't you try this other thing? And then you even show them, here are campaigns that have been doing it very successfully. So it's interesting, but there's just cognitive dissonance about it of, it's really different, and they just think it's a huge risk. And I'm sort of surprised because you're just like, I don't think it's that big of a risk, but then you're sort of having a nah conversation with them. So I try to really respect what they're thinking and do it in baby steps. But the hard thing is once you, I don't even know what we call the opposite of asset-based framing is, but once you do the negative of it, deficit framing, once you do the deficit framing, you almost can't step back from it.
Yeah.
So you have to commit to it really early, and then you have to be just vigilant about it. So you got to take that leap. It's hard. I find people really struggle with it.
And what are some other campaigns that have worked for you that you use as examples? Like, okay, this is where we asset frame. This is where we started out with defining what a win looks like, and here we are.
Yeah. I mean, God, I was like, I've had so many campaigns. I was saying earlier in the session that I was going back because I was in Miami, and I remembered very distinctly I ran this big campaign called Give Swordfish a Break, which was a while ago. And
Give Swordfish a Break.
A break, yeah. And I was saying how, that people had come and said we need to run a campaign. We're overfishing swordfish. And I was like, sounds like a bummer. It's a big, wonky government situation. And they were like, and we need you to get people to care about that. And I was like, oh, no, I don't even know. Like, how am I going to get people to wake up in the morning and be like, swordfish? So, and I just remember thinking about it. And then they made us do message testing. And I found the strongest messaging was, we're eating, swordfish stocks are plummeting. We're eating the babies. We need to stop eating them now so we can eat them again later. Like, that was basically the strongest messaging I could do. And I was like, we are going to get killed. Like, this is not going to go. But to the point of like really get up and look and be like, okay, I don't really have to get people to care about this wonky regulation stuff. I just need to get them to care about the food. And we all started thinking about it, and we were like, well, who tells people what they can eat or what to eat? And first we were like moms, and I'm like, we're never getting the moms on this one. But then somebody was like celebrity chefs, and I was like, yeah. So when we launched the Give Swordfish a Break campaign, it was all celebrity chefs. And pretty soon all the magazines that do recipes also said they wouldn't serve it.
Wow.
They wouldn't have recipes on it. The cruise ships down here wouldn't serve it. So suddenly the government was like, oh my God, we gotta get on top of this. And it was so interesting. It's just a real reminder of like how to actually have influence in society. And you just have to kind of understand, again, it was that really important question, which is who tells people what they can eat? And that option suddenly was like, oh, we could probably get some chefs to, and I mean, it went crazy. It was unbelievable. But I think, that's the kind of creativity we need these days because there's so much noise. I mean, even then, not nearly as much as now. So you just think about just getting people's focused attention on something is so hard. And so I think campaigns really have to be creative. But what's so interesting about it, even though eventually we probably had more money to spend, when you think about it, that creative idea cost very little. But it was really good, smart thinking that actually broke through on an issue that's, not a top priority for people. So that's what I really try and tell people is this thinking first is really important. And the other thing I think it was, going back to asset-based framing, is that it gave you something you could do that was going to have an immediate impact.
Yeah.
And I just think that like they could stop eating. So sometimes the impact we're trying to get them to do is to like get involved in a regulatory process. And I don't know if you ever wake up in the morning and say to yourself, God, I hope today it's regulatory process day.
I can't think of one time I ever said
it. So, but when suddenly you can contribute to something, and I love when y'all talk about asset framing so much when we talk about people who contribute to things. Yes. And when you can give people a contributing role into solving a problem that initially you think, I have nothing to do with swordfish.
Yeah.
I have nothing. And suddenly you're like, actually, you choose to eat it or not. And it was like, oh. And so when you bring it and you're like, I am contributing to helping make the world better. And at the end of the day, people really like that. Yeah. And so I think right now we have a society that is pessimistic and for good reasons. But we kind of can't exist as an imaginative, vibrant society if we're all so pessimistic all the time. Yeah. And so to me, asset-based framing will help us shift the mood of this nation if we actually all double down on it.
Yeah, and that's so important to think about, one, the immediate actions, but two, the simplicity of how do you get people to actively participate. That's so important.
Exactly. And even like how we think about people in places. So I was just thinking as you were talking about the different campaigns, and for so long we were working on food deserts, and we talked about people who live in food deserts. And they're so far from a supermarket, and they can't get a head of lettuce, and all the things. And it was funny because I went into focus groups to try and get people involved in insisting that supermarkets and other things get placed within these food deserts. And what the people said to me was, why don't those people move? Like, why do they live in that place? And what's so interesting about that is you realize the whole way we were messaging it is so wrong that they think that people can just up and move. But it's almost like people are so dumb that they're staying in this bad situation, as opposed to this entire structural badness is all around them.
Yes.
But what was interesting is, so again, we go back to the drawing board of like, we're making this worse. Like by talking about food deserts. And I actually think they do it a lot anytime they talk about gaps. Like as soon as we do the gap, because you're always trying to figure out like, who's to blame for that? And when there's not a super obvious one because it's structural, then suddenly it's like, oh, it's those people who are like, why aren't they working hard enough? Why aren't they learning more? Why don't they move? Yeah. Anyway, we created this whole program in Georgia around living in a food oasis. And suddenly you're like, right, because everybody wants to live in a food oasis. So, well, what does it take to live in a food oasis? same solutions, right? But suddenly you're like, oh, food oasis, that sounds really nice. And the people who live there must be so smart. And it's like, right. So I just think it's so interesting is that a lot of times, even when we don't realize that we're talking about people in a deficit, we are.
Yeah.
And we don't understand how suddenly, rather than really empathizing with them, people get frustrated.
Yeah.
And they start to blame the last people that should be blamed. But if you understand that's the psychology, it's so important to not make that worse.
Yeah. And in this time of deep polarization, when folks are, overwhelmed with information, overflooded, it's everywhere. And then the algorithms are deciding what we hear,
Exactly.
I joked today and said, I haven't seen my mom in 5 months online.
Yes.
And she posts every day.
Exactly.
Right? Because the algorithms have determined what we see. So how do you cut through the noise with a campaign to get people to move to action? What's been successful for you?
To cut through the noise, you really need to understand where people are getting their information. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things that campaigners have to do these days, because that is evolving so fast. Like when you think about the time where, like on a serious issue, you think like, oh, if I'm dealing with human rights or voting rights, they're going to get that information from a mainstream news source. But maybe not. Maybe they're going to get it from their favorite podcaster because they're going to decide to talk about it as an aside to something else. And so suddenly you have to really think about it. I always try and envision the people I'm trying to be engaged with is like, what does their surround sound look like? And where are the places I can be popping up and shaping how they think about this thing
I love that
and what
term,
they might
surround
like to do?
sound.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you can kind of picture the person and then be like, oh, and I think, it's just been such a critical shift to understand. It used to be that we would talk about people like online and offline, like as if they were two different people. And I guess some people are, they have, they have secret
That
names.
is another
That's right. Totally
podcast
different
episode.
thing, right? But in this case, I think, just really understanding that a person walks through their life, and you have to understand how they're walking through life and who they're listening to and who they're trusting to decide what they think about things, keeping in mind that one of the ways they do that is through these algorithms and what it's likely pushing them. And you cannot discount that.
Yeah. So for the professionals and leaders out there who are listening and really need some, good thought partners in campaigning, generally, what do people come to you for? And then, how do you work with them to build their campaigns?
A lot of people will come to me, either they're starting a brand new campaign, like they haven't even thought about it and they really want to say, hey, do you think this is viable? And that's a great thing. I told people today, I said, you need your hard truth squad. You need people to come and tell you like, that is not going to work. Or, you need to think more out of the box. That's just going to be the same as anything else. Because again, getting attention is so hard. But a lot of times people actually come to me because they've been running a campaign and it's stalled out. And they're really trying to figure out, how can we get that next oomph? How can we go? And usually that's the moment you're going from the choir to some new folks you're trying to engage with. And you don't really know them that well. And you really do need to go do your homework to figure out who are they and what do they care about. A lot of people, I live in Montana, and so I live rural and I live in a red state. And, people tell me all the time, call me and they'll be like, okay, so, they're talking about cutting SNAP benefits and food benefits, and that's terrible. And, Kristen, you have to go out there and you have to tell the people that, that's their benefits and they're going to get cut. And, they shouldn't be voting this way and they should be, why? And then they finally say the words that to me are the worst words you can utter, which is, why are they voting against their self-interest? And I'm like, they're not. You just don't know what it is. And in this case, a lot of people who are on food stamps, their problem isn't whether or not they're going to have food stamps or not, although that will be a problem. It's that they're so mad they're on food stamps in the first place. Like, why is opportunity so lacking that they have to go to a food pantry rather than a grocery store? And they don't get that. They don't get how mad people are that so many things are not working for them, that this is their fate at the moment. And so going in and acting like, and now on top of everything else, you don't even know your own mind and you don't know what's best for your family. It is so insulting. And it's just like, I think so many campaigns get to that place where they're very frustrated. They can't motivate these people. But instead of judging them, they need to listen more because they don't. As soon as they utter those words, I'm like, you do not get it.
A light bulb, 10,000 light bulbs just went off in my head. Because I've said that
Me
statement
too.
time and time again.
Me too.
And from an asset-based perspective, putting words into people's mouth or projecting or whatever it may be can, one, be insulting, two, they disengage,
Right.
and then three, you don't really get an opportunity to lean into what the actual things are.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you so much. What's one resource that has been good for you and good for campaigners in developing campaigns?
Honestly, the two things I will give you is one, we do have Planning to Win at the SpitfireStrategies.com website. It's a good, and it's a quick. I'm a person who's like, plan your campaigns quickly and then see how they're going in real time. So, some people have campaign planning that's at 350 pages. Like, this is 7 steps. You can do it in an afternoon. It'll get you a good start. But honestly, I tell people, I say, go look at campaigns that are going right now, the ones that got your attention, and go and see, what are they doing? What was so smart about them? Can you see the underlying strategy and how might you apply that in your thing? Because I just think at the end of the day, again, things are evolving so fast between technology, the information ecosystem. It's really good to go figure out what's working and duplicate it, rather than think you're going to come up with it from scratch without going and looking at, hey, who's having the luck out there right now? Because there's a lot of great role models.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the insight. Thank you for being a part of the show. This has been another great episode of From the Source. Listen, if you are thinking about a new campaign, having issues with campaigns, you want to connect with Kristen, check us out on nextnarrative.org. I'm your host, Benjamin Carlton, and we'll see you on the next episode of From the Source.